Pam turned around and saw a little girl sitting at the edge of the sidewalk, hugging her knees. Her blonde hair was disheveled, and tears shimmered on her cheeks. She looked no older than 8. There was no one nearby to comfort her, only passers-by hurrying past, casting quick glances. Pam set her bag on the ground and walked up to the girl. She knelt down to be at eye level and gently asked, "Hi there, sweetheart. Why are you crying? What happened?" The girl lifted her tearful eyes. Her voice trembled as she replied, "My grandpa. He's really sick. I don't know what to do." Pam felt a tightening in her chest. She looked around, hoping to find an adult, but no one seemed to be coming. The girl was alone. "What's your name?" Pam asked calmly. "Mary," she replied, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her pink sweater. "And where are your parents, Mary?" "Mom's at work. Grandpa's at home. But he won't get up. I went to buy bread, but I'm scared that he—" Her voice cracked, and she started crying again. Pam took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't just leave the child there. Her instincts, sharpened by years working in the prosecutor's office, told her the situation could be serious. But instead of acting impulsively, she decided to get more information first. "Mary, do you know where you live? Can you show me the way to your grandpa?" The girl nodded, though uncertainly. Pam stood up, picked up her bag, and held out her hand. "Let's go together. We'll see what we can do." They walked through the narrow streets of Orlando, past old brick houses with faded signs and parked pickup trucks. Mary held Pam's hand, her small fingers gripping tightly. Pam noticed the girl was barefoot. Her sneakers must have been left behind in the rush. The asphalt was warm from the sun, and the smell of heated tar mixed with the distant hum of a lawnmower. After 10 minutes, they stopped in front of a small house with peeling green paint on the walls. An old lawn chair stood in the yard, and an empty beer can lay on the porch. Mary pushed the door, it wasn't locked, and called out, "Grandpa, I'm back." Silence. Only the faint sound of a TV came from deeper inside, a commercial for senior insurance. Pam followed Mary inside, the air thick with a smell of medicine and stale dust. On the couch in the small living room lay an older man, thin, with gray hair and sunken cheeks. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow and wheezy. A water bottle and some empty blister packs of pills sat on the table nearby. "Grandpa." Mary rushed to him, but he didn't respond. Pam quickly assessed the situation. She walked over to the man, gently touched his shoulder, and said loudly, "Sir, can you hear me?" He slowly opened his eyes, but his gaze was cloudy. Pam realized help was needed and pulled out her phone to call an ambulance. But just as she dialed 911, the door slammed open and a middle-aged man burst into the house. He wore a dirty t-shirt and a cap with a local auto shop logo. His face was red with anger. "What the hell is going on? Who are you, and what are you doing in my house?" he barked, stepping toward Pam. Mary hid behind Pam and whispered, "That's my Uncle Tim." Pam stood up straight, keeping her composure even though her heart was pounding. She knew the situation could escalate, but her experience told her that aggression would only make things worse. She raised her hand in a calming gesture and said, "I'm Pam. I found Mary on the street. She was crying and said her grandpa was sick. I just want to help." Tim scowled, his gaze flickering between Pam and the old man on the couch. "Help? We didn't ask for any help. And why should I trust you? You look like one of those people who can't mind their own business." "I understand you might be scared or upset," Pam said calmly. "But your father doesn't look well. I called an ambulance. You can check my phone if you want." Tim clenched his fists, but didn't move. There was uncertainty in his eyes. Pam noticed his shoulders drop slightly. He wasn't sure what to do next. Just then, the sound of a siren came from a street. The ambulance was near. "Listen, Tim," Pam continued, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not your enemy. Mary is scared, and your father needs a doctor. Let's just make things better for everyone, okay?" Tim didn't reply, but his silence spoke volumes. He stepped back as the paramedics burst into the house with a stretcher and medical equipment. Pam moved aside, holding Mary's hand, as the medics examined the old man. One of them, a young man with a short beard, turned to Tim. He seemed severely dehydrated and may have overdosed on his medication. "We're taking him to the hospital. Who's coming with us?" Tim rubbed his face and muttered, "I'll go." Pam felt a wave of relief, but she knew this was only the beginning. She looked at Mary, still trembling, and realized that this little girl and her family were caught in something much deeper than a sick grandfather. Something in the house, the tension, the neglect, Tim's anger, pointed to larger problems. And Pam, though she could have walked away, felt she couldn't leave things as they were. When the ambulance left, trailing the scent of disinfectant and the sound of its engine, Pam knelt beside Mary and quietly asked, "Who's going to take care of you until your mom gets home?" Mary shrugged. "I don't know. Mom works late." Pam nodded. She knew a hard day was ahead, and maybe more than just a day. But a plan was already forming in her mind. She wasn't going to leave this child alone, and she wasn't going to let the injustice she felt in that house go unanswered. Pam stood at the threshold of Mary's house, watching as the ambulance disappeared around the corner, its siren gradually fading in the warm Orlando air. Mary was still holding onto her hand, her small fingers gripping Pam's palm as if it was the only anchor in her crumbling little world. Pam looked down at the girl. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a faint spark of hope in them. She knew she couldn't just take Mary home and leave. There was more going on here than just a sick grandfather. "Mary," Pam said, squatting down in front of her, "when does your mom get home from work?" "Usually late," the girl replied, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "She works at the supermarket, sometimes until 10 at night." Pam glanced at her watch. It was just past 4 in the afternoon. She couldn't leave an 8-year-old alone in a house that smelled of neglect, with empty pill blister packs scattered on the table. She stood up and said, "Come with me. We'll grab your things, and you'll stay with me until your mom gets home. Then we'll figure out how to help your grandfather." Mary nodded, though uncertain. They walked back into the house, where the TV was still mumbling an ad for cheap hearing aids. Pam noticed how few things there were: an old couch with sunken cushions, a worn carpet, a few yellowed photos on the wall. In one of them, she saw a young man in military uniform, probably Mary's grandfather in his youth. Mary quickly packed her backpack, tossing in a notebook, a pencil, and a pair of socks, then took Pam's hand. As they walked to Pam's car, a silver sedan parked 2 blocks away, she called the hospital where they'd taken her grandfather. Her voice was calm but firm as she introduced herself. "This is Pem Bondi. I'd like to know about the condition of the man who was just brought in from Oak Ridge Street. His granddaughter is with me." After a short pause, the nurse on the other end responded, "He's in stable condition, but he hasn't regained consciousness yet. We're running tests. Are you a relative?" "No, but I'm taking care of his granddaughter while her mother's at work. Can you tell me what he needs?" Pam knew how to extract information without raising her voice. "We suspect heart failure and possibly side effects from his medication. He needs a full examination and probably new prescriptions. But it's expensive, and he seems to have no insurance." Pam thanked the nurse and hung up. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She knew what this was like: elderly people, veterans, families barely getting by, trapped in a system where medical care was a privilege, not a right. Her political career had been full of fighting such injustices, but this time she could do something concrete. They arrived at Pam's house, a modest but well-maintained cottage on the outskirts of town. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and lavender from a candle on the windowsill greeted them. Pam turned on the kettle and placed a plate of cookies in front of Mary. "Eat," she said. "I'll call your mom." Mary gave her mom's number, and within minutes, Pam was talking to a woman named Clara, Mary's mother. Her voice sounded tired but tinged with panic. "You're saying my father's in the hospital? Oh God, I didn't know." I can't leave work now, I'll get fired. Don't worry, Pam reassured her. Mary's with me, she's safe. You finish your shift, and we'll sort everything out. Clara sighed with relief, though reluctantly agreeing. Pam hung up the phone and turned back to Mary, who was nibbling on the cookies at the kitchen table. Your grandfather's in the hospital, and I'm going to make sure he gets the help he needs, Pam said. But I need to know more. What's been going on with him? Mary shrugged. He's been coughing a lot. And he said his chest hurt. But he didn't want to go to the doctor, because he said it was too expensive. Uncle Tim said he was just being lazy. Pam frowned. She remembered Tim's anger, his harshness. Something wasn't right in this family, and she felt that Mary's grandfather had become a victim of not just illness, but neglect. The next few hours were spent with Pam on the phone, contacting the hospital, old legal contacts, and even a local charity that helped veterans. She learned that Mary's grandfather, Joseph King, was a Vietnam War veteran, but due to bureaucratic errors, he had lost access to his benefits. His condition had been worsening for months, and the pills he was taking were cheap substitutes that only made things worse. By 8 p.m., Pam decided to head to the hospital. She took Mary with her, putting her in the back seat with a pillow and blanket. As they drove, the girl fell asleep, and Pam turned on the radio. The local station was playing old hits from the 60s, and the song Stand By Me quietly filled the car. At the hospital, Joseph was in a room on the second floor. He was hooked up to N4, and the monitors beeped quietly. Pam approached his bed and saw that he had woken up. His eyes, though tired, were clear. Who are you? He rasped. I'm Pem Bondi. I found your granddaughter on the street and called the ambulance. How do you feel? Joseph coughed, his hand trembling on the blanket, like an old engine sputtering out. But thank you. Mary, is she okay? Yes, she's with me, sleeping in the hallway, Pam answered, nodding toward the door. He sighed in relief, but then his face darkened. I didn't want this. I thought I could handle it. Didn't want to be a burden on Clara or Mary. You're not a burden, Pam said firmly. And I'll make sure you get the treatment you need. I've already talked to the doctors. You need new medications and probably a few weeks in the hospital. I'll pay for it. Joseph looked at her, eyes filled with disbelief and suspicion. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Pam smiled, not warmly, but with the kind of confidence that used to persuade juries. Because I know what injustice looks like. And I know sometimes it only takes one person to say enough for everything to change. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and Tim walked in. His cap was askew, and his eyes were filled with a mix of anger and exhaustion. I heard you're here, he said, looking at Pam. You think you can just barge into our lives and fix everything? We don't need your pity. Pam straightened up, her gaze cold, but her voice remained calm. This isn't pity, Tim. It's responsibility. Your father's sick, your niece is scared, and your sister can barely hold on. You can be angry at me, but that won't change the fact that I'm going to help. Tim clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists. But this time he didn't shout. He just stood there, looking at his father, then quietly said, I don't want him to die. Then help me make sure he lives, Pam replied. Tim looked away, and a shadow of shame crossed his face. Pam knew she'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. She turned back to Joseph and said, Rest. I'll be back tomorrow. When she walked out into the hallway, holding the sleeping Mary in her arms, her thoughts were buzzing. She'd paid the first part of the bill, $8,000 from her own savings, but she knew more expenses lay ahead. And then there was Tim, his anger, his pride. And somewhere, Clara still didn't know how everything was about to change. Pam got into the car, laid Mary down on the back seat, and looked up at the dark sky. She felt like she was caught up in something big, something that could either break this family or save it. And she was ready to see it through to the end. Pem Bondi sat in her car outside the hospital, watching the first rays of sunlight on April 6, 2025, break through the palms, swaying in the light breeze. Mary was still asleep in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket, her breathing quiet and steady. Pam had spent the entire night reflecting on Joseph, on Tim, on Clara, on how a random encounter with a little girl on the sidewalk had dragged her into someone else's fight. But she had no regrets. Her career in the prosecutor's office had taught her one thing: justice doesn't come by itself, it has to be fought for. She returned to the hospital early in the morning, leaving Mary with a neighbor, kindly elderly Mrs. Ruth, who had agreed to look after the girl. In the room, Joseph looked slightly better. His cheeks had gained a faint pink hue, and his breathing was less labored. A doctor, a middle-aged woman with short dark hair and a stern expression, sat next to him. "Miss Bondi," she said, standing up, "I'm Dr. Ellis. We ran tests. He has chronic heart failure, but we've stabilized his condition. He'll need new medications and a few weeks of observation. But there's a problem. Without insurance, it will cost tens of thousands of dollars." Pam nodded, her gaze firm. "I'll cover everything. Make a list of the required medications and procedures. And one more thing, I want you to check if we can reinstate his veterans' benefits. He served in Vietnam." Dr. Ellis raised her eyebrows in surprise, but agreed. Pam took out her checkbook and wrote the first payment, $15,000, leaving it on the table next to Joseph's bed. He watched this with astonishment and a faint smile. "Are you an angel or something?" he croaked. "No, just someone who knows what it's like to fight for others," Pam replied, sitting beside him. "But I need your help. Tell me about your family. How did this happen?" Joseph sighed, his fingers nervously clutching the edge of the sheet. "After the war, I worked as a mechanic, but my health started to give out. Clara, my daughter, is raising Mary on her own. Her husband left when the girl was 2. Tim, he's my son, but we've been estranged for a long time. He thinks I'm weak, that I can't give my family what they need. He's angry at everyone, me, Clara, the world." Pam listened quietly, her thoughts forming a clear picture. She realized that Tim was not just a brute, but someone hiding his pain behind anger. And she knew how to work with that. Later that day, around noon, Clara arrived at the hospital. Her supermarket uniform was wrinkled, and dark circles under her eyes revealed sleepless nights. She rushed to her father, hugged him, and then turned to Pam. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "But we can't pay you back. I earn $12 an hour. It's barely enough for rent." "You don't have to pay anything back," Pam replied. "I'm not doing this for thanks. But I want you to let me help more. I'll talk to people who can help you find a better job. And we'll get your father's benefits back." Clara cried, wiping her tears with her sleeve. At that moment, Tim entered the room. He looked as though he hadn't slept all night. His eyes were red, and his cap was crumpled in his hands. He stopped at the door, hesitant to approach. "I heard you're paying for everything," he muttered, looking at the floor. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," Pam said calmly, "but your family needs this. And I think you do too, even if you won't admit it." Tim looked up at her, and for the first time, there was no anger in his eyes, just exhaustion and something like shame. "I don't know how to fix everything," he said quietly. "I've tried, but it's not working." Pam stood up and walked over to him, her voice firm but not harsh. "You can start by being here. Not yelling, not running away, just being here. Your father didn't cause his illness. And Clara isn't to blame for working all night. You can be a family if you want to." Tim was silent but nodded. He walked over to Joseph's bed and sat down next to him, taking his hand. Joseph squeezed it in response, weakly but with warmth, a warmth that hadn't been there between them for years. Over the next few days, Pam worked tirelessly. She reached out to her old contacts in the Florida government and secured the reinstatement of Joseph's veterans' benefits. She paid for all his medications, from expensive heart medications to physical therapy, spending nearly $30,000 of her savings. She even hired a lawyer to help Clara apply for affordable housing, and she found a spot in a rehabilitation group for veteran families where Tim could work through his anger. By the end of the week, Joseph was sitting up in bed, laughing with Mary, who had brought him a drawing, a sun over a house with green walls. Clara had found a new job at a local office with a salary twice as much as at the supermarket. And Tim, though still quiet, started coming to the hospital every day, bringing his father newspapers and coffee from the nearby diner. On the last day, when Pam came to say goodbye, Joseph took her hand and said, "You gave us more than money. You gave us a chance to start over." Pam smiled. Sometimes it's enough just to reach out and everything changes. Clara hugged her, Mary bounced around her, and Tim, standing to the side, quietly said, "Thank you. I won't forget this." When Pam left the hospital, the sun was high in the sky. She got into her car and turned on the radio. Louis Armstrong's "What a Wonderful World" was playing. Her chest filled with warmth she hadn't felt in years. She hadn't solved all the world's problems, but she had changed one small corner, one family who now had hope. On her way home, she thought about possibly returning to politics. Not for fame or power, but to fight for those like Joseph, Clara, and Mary, who had found themselves on the sidelines. But that would be tomorrow. Today, she was simply driving, listening to music, and feeling like the world had become a little better.